In the small town of Sudbury, Ontario, Canada, 2022 turned out to be a tough year for the locals. The winter brought a sharp chill, along with an inexplicable tension that hung in the air. The town, surrounded by endless forests and lakes, had always been quiet, but in early January, an event shook everyone. At the center of attention was the White family, 46-year-old Gregory and 43-year-old Linda, a seemingly exemplary couple with 2 children. Their 17-year-old daughter Emily was popular among her peers, and known for her high academic performance. Her younger brother Jason, 2 years younger, lived in her shadow, but the family seemed to live peacefully and happily. It all started on January 14th, when Emily suddenly disappeared. Her absence became known in the evening when she didn't return home after school. The parents raised the alarm only after several hours. According to them, Emily might have stayed at a friend's house, but by midnight, Linda began calling her daughter's friends, who knew nothing about her whereabouts. About half an hour later, around 12:45 a.m., Gregory called the police to report her missing. Officers arrived at the White home around 1 a.m. The Whites explained that there was no sign of trouble in the morning. Emily had breakfast and left for school as usual. She was last seen at school around noon. At first glance, it seemed like a typical case of a missing teenager who might have run away. The police did not immediately view the situation as critical, but standard search efforts began. On the next day, the search intensified, and officers organized teams to check local forests, schools, and parks. Social media and local news outlets quickly spread the word about Emily's disappearance, circulating her photograph and pleas for help. During this time, the White home became a hub for active police interaction with the family. Linda and Gregory appeared dejected and their statements were inconsistent, but this did not raise suspicions with the police. On the 3rd day after Emily's disappearance, doubts began to arise. Friends of Emily started to speak about the tense relationship between the girl and her parents. Emily often complained about her mother's excessive control and strict punishments. However, her friends noted that her father was more detached and never intervened in the conflicts between her mother and her. Classmates mentioned that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Emily had become withdrawn, skipped classes, and stopped participating in school events. Despite the efforts of the police and local volunteers, by the 4th day of the search, no traces or clues indicating Emily's whereabouts were found. The police then decided to take an investigative step searching the White home. Officers explained that this was necessary to rule out the possibility that Emily had left something in the house before disappearing. Linda and Gregory agreed to the search, and a team of forensic investigators arrived at the home that evening. During the search, nothing unusual was found. Emily's room looked as though its owner had left in a hurry. However, one of the units searching the area around the house stumbled upon a strange find. In a snowbank behind the garage, officers found a pair of winter boots covered in dirt and snow. They were soon identified as Emily's. This discovery changed the course of the investigation. The police began questioning neighbors and acquaintances of the family more thoroughly. One neighbor stated that he had seen Gregory White late on the evening of January 14th, walking through the backyard toward the garage. This fact raised new suspicions and drew the investigators' attention back to the family. They began to recheck actions taken on the day of Emily's disappearance. Reports of frequent arguments between Emily and her mother began to play a significant role in the case. Investigators noticed that Linda became increasingly nervous and agitated during interrogations. Her statements about the last days before her daughter's disappearance started to conflict with what Gregory had said. Soon, investigators noticed inconsistencies in the parents' accounts of how the morning of January 14th unfolded. On the 5th night of the investigation, the police decided to conduct a second search, this time with the use of police dogs. The dog led investigators to a shed in the backyard. Behind a wall in a concealed pit, they found Emily White's body. The girl had been strangled. The body was in a partially decomposed state, indicating that the murder had occurred in the first few days after her disappearance. The discovery of Emily White's body sent shockwaves through the community. Linda and Gregory were immediately detained for further questioning. During the interrogations, Linda began to lose her composure, stumbling several times in her answers, but she did not make any direct confessions. Gregory remained calm, but he could not explain why Emily's boots had been found behind the garage. Investigators began piecing together the last days of Emily's life based on the evidence they had found. The forensic examination showed that the girl had been strangled by hand, and the marks on her body indicated that it was done by someone physically stronger than her. It was possible that the attack occurred in a fit of rage. Meanwhile, several messages were discovered on Emily's phone, which had been found in her room. These messages, sent to friends in the days leading up to her disappearance, revealed that she had been complaining about the growing tension between her and her mother, who had been deceiving her more and more. Emily also mentioned that the tension in the house was escalating and that she felt trapped. The investigation revealed that Linda White was an extremely strict mother who demanded total obedience from her daughter. Emily, on the other hand, was going through a difficult adolescent rebellion which only worsened the family conflict. The final straw was Emily's decision to leave home, which triggered an outburst of rage from Linda. Gregory, it seemed, did not intervene until the situation had spiraled out of control. The interrogations of the parents continued for several days. Under pressure from the evidence and witness testimonies, as well as after the discovery of Emily's body, Linda White eventually broke down and gave a partial confession. She claimed that on the day of the incident, another argument between her and her daughter had escalated into physical aggression. Linda insisted that she did not intend to kill Emily but, in a fit of rage, miscalculated her strength. Gregory White, who had initially denied any involvement in the crime, later admitted that he had helped his wife cover up the murder. He was the one who hid their daughter's body in the shed and tried to create the appearance of her disappearance. After the arrest of Gregory and Linda White, the police began a more thorough investigation into their family history. The investigation sought to understand what led to the tragedy and how events unfolded in the days leading up to the murder. Meanwhile, shock and confusion spread throughout Sudbury. For local residents who had always considered the Whites a perfectly normal, even exemplary family, their arrest came as a real shock. Detectives quickly realized that the story of Emily's disappearance was far more complicated than it initially seemed. The White family, living in a two-story house on Quiet Street in the western part of the town, appeared perfect from the outside, but upon closer inspection, details began to emerge that pointed to problems hidden from outsiders. The first conclusions from forensic experts indicated that Emily's body had been carefully hidden and all traces of the crime had been masked. When Gregory and Linda White were brought together in Sudbury, forensic experts began a second search of the White home, focusing on areas that had not been thoroughly examined during the first search. The basement, which initially appeared to be an ordinary storage space, caught the investigators' special interest. From the very beginning of the interrogations, Linda claimed that she had not intended to kill her daughter and that it was an accident. However, items found in the basement suggested otherwise. In one corner of the basement, a plastic barrel with signs that it had recently been cleaned of blood was discovered. This discovery led investigators to suspect that Emily's death had been premeditated, not a spontaneous outburst of anger. Further inspection showed that Gregory, contrary to his initial statements of non-involvement, had played an active role not only in concealing the body, but possibly in the murder itself. On one of the workbenches in the garage, police found traces of recent repairs. Wood shavings and tools stained with blood suggested that Gregory, being a woodworker, might have attempted to destroy evidence using his professional equipment. Meanwhile, psychologists working with Linda began to notice instability in her mental state. Under the pressure of interrogations, she changed her testimony several times, contradicting herself. Initially, she claimed that the incident with Emily had been spontaneous, caused by another argument. However, she soon admitted that several days before the murder, she had begun thinking about how to deal with her daughter. Emily, she said, had become a constant source of stress and anxiety for her, and her desire to control her daughter had turned into an obsession. The evidence began to gradually form a grim picture. According to Linda's testimony and the investigators' conclusions, it became clear that the relationship between mother and daughter had been deteriorating for several years. Linda viewed any sign of independence from Emily as a threat to her control over the family. This became particularly apparent after Emily reached adolescence and began to assert her own personality, which in Linda's view, threatened to ruin their perfect family. Linda became increasingly aggressive and controlling. The body of Emily White found in the shed was not just hidden away. There had been attempts to conceal the signs of strangulation. Forensic experts found small scratches and marks on the girl's neck indicating strangulation by a foreign object. This contradicted Linda's version of a spontaneous fight. Everything appeared to have been a premeditated act. Forensic experts concluded that Emily had been strangled in two stages, first by hands and then using a cord, making her death even more agonizing. Several times neighbors heard screams coming from the White House, which ended in loud arguments between the parents and their daughter. One neighbor even saw Gregory take Emily out of the house on the day she disappeared, and she never returned. The investigation also revealed that several days before the murder, Gregory and Linda had actively prepared to conceal the crime. They had purchased several large plastic containers and chemicals, which were later found in the basement of the house. It seemed the couple had planned to dispose of their daughter's body in such a way that it would never be found. However, bad weather conditions and unexpected interest from neighbors disrupted their plans. This new information allowed the investigation to establish a more precise timeline of the events on that fateful day. According to the records, Emily had indeed returned home from school on January 14th. She spent several hours in her room, after which there was a confrontation with her parents that led to her death. The exact circumstances of what happened inside the house were still unclear, but the police believed that Linda started the argument, which escalated into a brutal attack on her daughter. Gregory, it seemed, joined in, helping his wife finish the act and hide the body. Meanwhile, the active legal proceedings against the Whites had begun. The couple was charged with first-degree murder, which implied that the crime was premeditated and planned. The people of Sudbury watched the developments in horror. Local residents who had known the White family for many years could not believe they were capable of such a heinous act. The media covered the case with intense attention, and the White House became a symbol of the tragedy that had shocked all of Canada. At the same time, discussions began in the town about the role of social services and their possible failures in this case. Soon it became known that several years earlier, the White family had already attracted the attention of local child protection services, but no specific action had been taken. It seemed that Emily had fallen through the cracks of these systemic problems, which failed to intervene in time and prevent the tragedy. During this time, Gregory and Linda White began to give their testimonies in court. Linda, despite her initial confession, tried to change her version of the events, claiming that the murder was an accident. She again stated that she could not have killed her daughter, but investigators and prosecutors had already gathered enough evidence to disprove these claims. Gregory, on the other hand, continued to remain silent, refusing to provide detailed testimony about his role in the crime. Despite Gregory's silence, the investigation continued to strengthen its case through the evidence found and the testimony of witnesses. One of the key moments was that Gregory had helped Linda hide the body and destroy evidence. He was seen by neighbors near the shed on the night after Emily disappeared, which indicated his direct involvement in the crime. The legal proceedings against Linda and Gregory White continued, and with each new hearing, the picture of the crime became clearer. Prosecutors sought to prove that Emily's murder had been premeditated and that both parents had played active roles in committing it. The investigation focused on reconstructing the events of the day of the murder using numerous pieces of evidence gathered over the course of a month-long investigation. After analyzing the evidence, including footage from surveillance cameras and testimonies from neighbors, it became clear that the Whites had begun preparing for their daughter's murder several days before the tragedy. In the final weeks of Emily's life, tension in the White home had been escalating. The psychological pressure from Linda and Gregory had been increasing, with more frequent arguments and outbursts of aggression every day. The investigation into the family dynamics revealed several key facts that may have contributed to Linda and Gregory's motives. It turned out that Linda suffered from chronic stress related to her need to control her daughter. Despite an outwardly prosperous life, Linda's mental state worsened as Emily grew older and became more independent. This created an unbearable atmosphere in the family, where control and manipulation became Linda's way of managing her own anxiety. Gregory, it was discovered, not only did not oppose his wife's abusive behavior, but gradually began to adopt her mindset. Despite his calm demeanor and seemingly passive nature, Gregory supported Linda when she resorted to physical punishment of their daughter. His role as the protector of the family manifested in his desire to maintain the appearance of harmony, even if it required extreme measures. This psychological profile of the White family became an important part of the prosecution's strategy. One of the key pieces of evidence was footage from surveillance cameras installed near the White home. The footage showed Gregory White returning home on the day of the murder. He drove up to the house around noon, even though he had claimed to be at work during that time. This supported the prosecution's theory that he had deliberately left work to take part in the crime. Forensic examination also played a crucial role in the case. Forensic experts confirmed that Emily had fought for her life, which proved the premeditated nature of the attack. The cord used to strangle her was found at the crime scene with remnants of skin and hair, making it one of the key pieces of evidence. Emily's psychological state in the days leading up to her death also became a central part of the investigation. Her friends and acquaintances testified that she had been suffering from deep depression caused by the pressure from her parents. Emily had been trying to improve her life, but her mother's constant interference had ruined her attempts to escape the control of the family. Emily had even been planning to run away from home in the months before her death, but never had the chance to follow through with her plans. The investigation also relied on the testimony of friends of the White family. One of the key witnesses was a neighbor who had seen strange things happening in the White House in the days leading up to the murder. He reported seeing Gregory and Linda loading large plastic containers into a car a few days before the tragedy, which were later found in the basement. This discovery reinforced the suspicion that the couple had begun preparing to dispose of the body even before they committed the crime. In addition, the family's financial problems emerged as a potential motive for the murder. In the months leading up to Emily's death, the Whites had been on the verge of bankruptcy. Gregory had lost part of his income due to work problems, and Linda, who had tried to maintain their previous lifestyle, had fallen into debt. Financial pressure intensified the emotional tension in the family, and Emily may have become a burden they saw as an obstacle in dealing with their financial struggles. The investigation continued to uncover more shocking details. One significant development occurred when police began analyzing the contents of Linda and Gregory's phones. In their messages from the days before the murder, they found clear signs that they had been discussing possible ways to solve the problem with their daughter. Linda had written to Gregory about her fear of losing control over Emily, saying she couldn't tolerate her disobedience any longer, and that something had to be done. Gregory, in his responses, did not disagree but instead encouraged her to act, further raising suspicions of their joint involvement in the crime. In parallel with the legal proceedings, public pressure in Sudbury was mounting. The town became a battleground for discussions about how such a monstrous crime could have occurred in what seemed like an ordinary family. Local media continuously covered the case, fueling residents' outrage and demands for justice. People took to the streets with signs, calling not only for the punishment of the Whites, but also for reforms in social services, which, in their opinion, had missed the opportunity to intervene and save Emily. The defense of Linda and Gregory was weak. Their lawyers tried to present the crime as a tragic incident caused by a momentary outburst of anger, but the overwhelming evidence pointed to the contrary. The court proceedings became increasingly tense, especially as experts testified to the calculated nature of the couple's actions. The prosecution pushed for a first-degree murder conviction, which implied a premeditated and deliberate crime. As the case progressed, new facts about the Whites' family history emerged. It was revealed that a year before the murder, Linda had sought help from psychologists, complaining about problems with her daughter. However, instead of trying to resolve these issues through therapy, she had become more focused on control and punishment. Gregory's role in the family was also analyzed. At first, he appeared calm and even detached, but in the end, his complete silence and lack of attempts to protect his daughter from Linda's anger worked against him. One of the most dramatic moments in the case occurred when the court heard testimony from the detectives who had worked on the case. They confirmed that after her arrest, Linda had tried to confuse the investigation by repeatedly changing her testimony. While she initially claimed it was an accident, she later stated that Gregory had played the primary role in the murder. However, the evidence pointed to her leading role in the crime, with Gregory merely helping to hide the body and cover up the evidence. The legal proceedings took several months, during which new details continued to emerge. One of these was the forensic analysis of the contents of garbage bins found several kilometers from the White House. Inside, torn clothing and items belonging to Emily were found, further confirming the investigation's theory that the parents had tried to dispose of any evidence connected to the murder. Over time, the investigation pieced together a comprehensive picture of how the Whites had planned and carried out the murder of their daughter. Prosecutors put forward the theory that Linda was the primary instigator of the crime, driven by her obsessive fears and desire to regain control over the situation. Gregory, despite his seemingly passive nature, played a crucial role in supporting his wife and covering up the evidence. The trial of Linda and Gregory White entered its final phase. Public interest in the case did not wane, and the media continued to report daily on the court proceedings. The prosecution had finished presenting the evidence, and now the defense had to try to convince the court that the crime was not intentional murder, but a tragic accident. However, with each new fact, this seemed less and less likely. The key moment in the final phase of the trial was the examination of the White family's financial and personal problems. The investigation presented the court with evidence that revealed another important detail. Shortly before Emily's death, Linda had tried to collect life insurance on her daughter. While this might have initially seemed like a normal family precaution, investigators soon discovered that the amount for which Emily's life was insured had significantly increased just a few months before her death. This fact only strengthened the prosecution's case. The prosecution argued that the parents had not only murdered their daughter, but had planned to do so in advance. Witnesses brought in by the prosecution continued to recount the strange behavior of Linda and Gregory in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Neighbors recalled how Linda had started to appear less frequently in public, often looking worried, while Gregory had almost stopped interacting with people, spending more and more time at home. One of Gregory's co-workers noted that in the last month, Gregory had not been himself. He often complained about life and mentioned financial problems, but he never once talked about his daughter. This detachment seems suspicious against the backdrop of all the other evidence. Furthermore, the family's financial difficulties added to the picture of desperation in which Linda and Gregory found themselves. The investigation revealed that their house had been mortgaged, and if they failed to pay off their debts in time, the family would have lost their only home. Meanwhile, Linda had been actively trying to maintain the illusion of prosperity on social media, posting photos from expensive restaurants, and pretending that the family was still living in luxury. But behind this facade lay the harsh reality: the couple was barely making ends meet. Financial hardship, as the prosecution suggested, could have been the tipping point that drove them to murder their daughter. But the most shocking discovery came during the analysis of data from the Whites' mobile phones. Detectives found deleted messages in which Linda discussed with Gregory possible ways of solving the problem with their daughter. In one message, sent several weeks before the murder, Linda explicitly wrote, "We need to do something before it's too late." These words became key evidence of the premeditated nature of the crime. However, the defense attempted to challenge the charges. Linda and Gregory's lawyers built their defense on the claim that the family had complicated relationships with their daughter and that this was merely the tragic outcome of years of conflict, not a planned murder. They insisted that the incident in the house that day was an accident. Gregory claimed that he simply couldn't stop Linda in time when she, in a fit of rage, crossed the line, and that he had no intention of killing their daughter. Psychological evaluations conducted at the request of the defense also attempted to reduce Linda's culpability, claiming that she had been in a state of chronic stress, which pushed her toward irrational decisions. However, these arguments failed to sway the jury, the court, or the public. Too many facts pointed to the murder being premeditated and carried out with cold calculation. In parallel with the main trial, the investigation into Emily's life, her surroundings, and those who could confirm that she had lived under constant pressure from her parents, continued. Emily's friends, who gave testimony, revealed that she had frequently complained about her mother, who controlled her every move. Despite Emily's attempts to break free from this control, Linda did everything she could to limit her daughter's freedom. In the months leading up to her death, Emily had begun planning to run away from home, and this could have been one of the reasons why her parents decided to take such a drastic step. The final blow to the defense came when experts presented their conclusion on the marks found on Emily's body. The forensic report stated that there were multiple bruises on the girl's neck, consistent with strangulation. The force with which the injuries were inflicted suggested that it was not an instantaneous act of strangulation, but a prolonged process, which pointed to a deliberate intent to kill. The evidence collected at the crime scene confirmed that both Linda and Gregory were present in the room during the murder, making both of them responsible for the crime. After all the evidence was presented, the jury began deliberating. For several hours they discussed the case, weighing all the facts, but the verdict was clear from the start. The final judgment was as expected for all those involved in the trial. Linda and Gregory White were found guilty of the premeditated murder of their daughter Emily. The court ruled that their actions were cold-blooded and calculated. Linda and Gregory White were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, for those who had followed the case, questions remained that had never been fully answered. How could an ordinary family from a suburban house in Sudbury allow their lives to spiral into such a tragic ending? What exactly happened to Linda and Gregory that led them to commit such an atrocity? Emily White's death became a symbol of how hidden problems and internal family conflicts can lead to irreversible consequences. The community was left in shock by the case, and even after the verdict, discussions about the need for reforms in the social services system, which could prevent similar tragedies in the future, continued. Several months after the conclusion of the trial, the wounds from this case were still fresh in the heart of the small town. Neighbors, acquaintances, and friends of the White family could not believe that such a tragedy had been hiding behind the doors of an ordinary home. Residents of Sudbury would remember this case for a long time, a case that had shaken them to their core and left an indelible mark on the town's history. The story of Linda, Gregory, and Emily White served as a grim reminder that even in seemingly normal families, dark and destructive forces can be lurking beneath the surface.